Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. My name is Fernando Reimers, and I'm delighted to be joined at this seminar with my three co-authors of this recently published book, Artificial Intelligence and Education in the Global South, Zainab Azim, Maria Renee Palomo, and Calista Thoni. And we're delighted to be joined with Stefania Giannini, until recently Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, to have a conversation on the topic of artificial intelligence, which is one that she has devoted substantial attention and time to. Before we launch in, Stefania, let me thank you not only for making the time to be with us in this conversation, but for your exceptional leadership as Director of Education at UNESCO. There are so many things that you spearheaded in that role: a new commission on the futures of education, your role promoting green schools and attention to climate change, global citizenship education, how you elevated the role of universities and the connection between universities and education at a time that is very challenging when you took over, and that continues to be challenging because the spirit that animated the creation of institutions of global collaboration, of global governance, is sadly no longer with us. He's being challenged by a set of ideas that basically cause countries and leaders to retrench and to abandon this commitment to global cooperation in pursuit of our shared goals, whether those are the goals of educating our children, taking care of the planet, or promoting peace. So thank you very much for all you have done and for what you will continue to do. We are honored to be discussing this book with you. So let's just dive in, Stefania. As you know, in this book, we examine what is it that artificial intelligence is doing and can do. And what we think is an original take in the book is that we begin with the question of what are the big problems of education in the global south? And then we use that framing to ask, can artificial intelligence address them? Is it addressing them? What do we need to see happening? And so, with that framing in mind, and with the ideas that are in the book, and we offer a systems lens to think about it, we say education systems can only be seen as complex systems where various components are in interaction with each other and in interaction with their external environment. So, from your perspective, Stefania, not only as a leader of education at UNESCO, but beyond, as a member of the parliament in Italy, as a minister of education, how do you see artificial intelligence intersecting with the global education agenda, with the SDG agenda, with the right to education, and especially with the goal of advancing equity in the global South? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fernando. It's a great honor for me, a great pleasure to join this amazing community. You yourself, as a leader on education globally, and your co-authors. I will come in a minute to the importance, the relevance of this important contribution you are providing the international community with by this book. And thanks for your kind words. They are very touching for me. By the way, technically speaking, until the end of the month, I'm still here, as you see,
All right.
as UNESCO ADG. So we are in a full transition. And by the way, I'm going to still deal with AI in through education in a few days. So I will come later to this point. So it's quite, let's say, timely and crucial for me to discuss about this topic. And as you just mentioned before moving to the question and providing my point of view, it's been an amazing journey for all of us. It's been a real collective action to make the case for education as one of the main drivers for progress, development, and a better future. Unfortunately, as you said, we feel to live in a different world somehow. It's a different vocabulary, it's a different system of values that seems to be, let's say, pushed by important global players. So more than ever, it's important that we bring up our topics to the global attention. Now, AI in through education. As a first point, I would say technologies, generally speaking, including now crucially AI, are not a silver bullet. Cannot and must not be understood and framed as the key solution for still very much important and so many pending issues in education. I will come later to the big picture. They are not a separate agenda, but they can represent, crucially, the main driver for transformation and what actually systems of education need worldwide, including the Global South, maybe more than ever in the Global South, is a real transformation, more than schools reforms. As a former politician, I had to say that ministers do love to reform the school system. Whenever you go into the office, you want to have your reform with your signature, right? To say, that's my legacy. It's not only about that now. What we have to do is to how to adapt the system of learning, the way we learn and we teach, to a different world, to a different context. And AI can be a main driver for this transformation to happen. So, if digital transformation is part of the solution, we must have a clear mind of the current situation of education in the world. I mean, briefly speaking, I wish to mention challenges that are still there. We should not undermine the importance of access to education, which is not yet a right for all children and youth in the world. Progress has been made. When this organization, UNESCO, was established 80 years ago, less than the half of the world population aged for stepping foot in school were not allowed to do that. Now, 94% of the world population have access to primary school. So this is about the progress made. Still, we know, UNESCO data, that 262 million children and young people are still out school globally. And we should keep in mind this point when you work on technology to improve the quality and, let's say, the transformation, the transformative power of education. So, another important side of the coin is the role of teachers, because we know that without well-trained, well-prepared, well-supported teachers, nothing happens in the classroom. And maybe you remember our global teachers report on teachers published 2 years ago now. The world needs 44 million teachers globally. We have a huge gap, a shortage that is more concentrated than ever in the Global South. 50 million out of the 44 million are very much needed here and now in Africa in order to make African education systems to be adapted to the needs of a continent that does represent, together with Southeast Asian, the huge bunch of young people worldwide. So this brings me to part of the solution. That means that this unfinished business of education is still deeply structural. It's not about some, let's say, readjustment to be done here and there. And for structural problems, we need structural solutions. That's why I see AI, as by the way, the book clearly states and suggests, as fully integrated in curriculum and not a nice to add because there is a nice product on the market that seems to solve a problem that reforms and previous political choices didn't and decisions didn't address. So integrating AI in curriculum through a responsible and ethical approach from teachers, educators is part of the solution. Second point, what actually does it mean? Because there is an impact. If you want to be serious in digital transformation, ministers of education, broadly speaking, all over the world, but especially in the global south, where financial resources, unfortunately, are decreasing, I will come later on this point, year by year, have to decide where to invest the available funds. And this means crucially investing in teachers' digital skills and prioritizing their leading role in the classroom. And this means, on the other side, making learners aware of the risks and the opportunities of technology, including AI, of course. Let me say briefly that you remember very well we are together in this when COVID happened and actually shut down the entire world, especially about public services, health and education. We saw teachers on the front line, our heroes, to make continuity of learning through digital tools, whatever the tools was about. We saw in African countries, mostly radio channels, TV channels being readapted and repurposed for education. We saw in the Western and European, North American countries, platforms already well established, and connectivity being, let's say, part of our available tools used for ensuring continuity of learning. Well, I would say that COVID, among the few positive legacy that, let's say, as the unprecedented social experiment, the global social experiment, gave us a different understanding of what technology can do. And the lesson remains very relevant today. Technology can expand the continuity, enrich, personalize learning pathways, but without intentional policy, without capacity, without equity safeguards, it can also deepen existing divides. And that's where you come in with this book, because I think, at least this is my understanding, you say on one side, the global south is there in a very, increasing important need of transformation. AI can be an assist, can be an asset for that, but we must be used and accompany this process of transformation in a way that doesn't deepen existing divide. And this is not obvious at all. And this is also where UNESCO's role becomes especially important. I mean, it's been, believe me, not easy to bring around the table all these different stakeholders, governments on one side with all different needs, their all different visions, but also the private sector, for instance, that has to play a crucial role, in my opinion. We cannot have digital transformation in public systems, education, health, once again, leading this process without a very well aware, a very well responsible, a very well engaged private sector on our side. Otherwise, there will be two separate processes. One is market driven, whatever it means, whatever it takes, and the other one is, let me say in a very open way, a conservative approach, defending the territory. Having horses instead of car and electricity. You remember, we are not a generation which goes back to that times. But I'm sure that at the beginning of the last century, when electricity and, let's say, the second industrial revolution brought societies in a few countries first to readapt the system of production and mobility, there was a resistance from many different segments of society itself saying, "Oh, this is not good. This can jeopardize. This is not safe." It's not about banning. It's not about taking a distance. It's about taking ownership and leadership. And that's, I think, maybe 3 points to conclude this first round. Uh, what UNESCO is doing on this I mean, leading or trying to coordinate this global conversation on AI is about building the system capacity of countries, or at least supporting them in doing that. And this is an important point because it's from policy design, governance, teacher development, to curriculum adaptation, competency frameworks. All of these must be part of the kit, the new kit that the minister must have on his her desk. Second point, we see clearly that a normative anchor is needed. You remember, Fernando and the colleagues, I'm sure, the very first, not obvious at all, normative instrument that UNESCO member states adopted now 7 years ago, 2000, no, sorry, 5 years ago, 2021, the AI, ethics of AI recommendation. And this kind of shaping the way governments are making their own AI action plan, from Somalia to UK. And I have these two countries in mind because they came at the last Digital Learning Week last September here in Paris. And both ministers were presenting their own approach to AI policies in our conversation, of course, focusing on education, but these were two chapters of a broader, action plan. China, let's say, is the leading country in terms of ownership from the highest level of political leadership to the different work streams. Finally, I think we need the knowledge production. No, we know some, and that's why UNESCO can also support together with we have a lot of cooperation with Harvard and other outstanding institutes of research and universities, and it's our common shared responsibility to understand better, have better evidence of what AI can really improve, where are the fields where can make a difference, or where maybe it's not the best way to go, and where it's better to prioritize and privilege, let's say, a more traditional, let's say, conventional model of teaching and learning. So this is a little bit a first approach to this important subject. And thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Stefania, for this wonderful setting of the stage for the conversation. I'm going to ask my colleagues to highlight some of the topics that we discuss in the book in 3 segments. So we're going to talk about teacher professional development, we're going to talk about curriculum, and we're going to talk about governance. So let me turn it over to Zainab Azim, who's going to talk about a topic that I know is centrally important to UNESCO and to you personally, which is teachers and the future of the profession. Over to you, Zainab.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Stefania. It was great to hear when you shared the importance of teachers, students and teachers together. And there's so much rich stuff that you mentioned, but I want to hop off your point about the fact that when we talk about AI in education or any sort of technology in education, we can't merely talk about it as a technical solution. We have to understand the structural context, the cultural context in which that operates, because every country, every ministry, every district might define the purpose of education differently. They might define how they view and value educators differently, right? And so when we even talk about the context of the global south, I also don't want to homogenize that. It is a very diverse place, even within countries. Right, one country, it's so diverse from rural to urban, north to south, east to west. And so I'm going to generally talk about the context, but these contextual things can even apply to the US actually, when we talk about the fact that there is a teacher shortage, when we talk about the fact that they are unevenly prepared. That also applies to countries like the US, not just the global South. There's a heavy admin workload. They face a classroom where there's a heterogeneous group of students. They're not all at the same learning level, though they may be in the same grade. The professional development that they receive might not actually be relevant to what they need, right? One-off workshops we know are not shown to work as well as sustained professional development from the moment they enter the workforce to continuing on in their career. And so we know that the question isn't whether teachers need more support. They are the primary agent through which we not only implement curriculum, but they are the decision makers too of how things are taught in the classroom. So they're not just a robot like an AI that is implementing what you command it to do. They actually make those decisions. And so making sure they have that judgment, the professional judgment, to be able to make those decisions and have the time to do what matters most in education, which is the student-teacher relationship, the human relationship is really important. And so when we saw in our evaluation, we broke it down of what AI could do when we start from the place of if we really do see teachers as those decision makers that are and we're using AI not just to do their job but to help them do their job better, and then we also looked at what AI is actually doing. And so what we saw in terms of and what we imagined AI could do, and seeing what was out there, is the key thing. One is increasing teachers' capacity in the professional judgment through scalable instructional coaching. We know even coaching in developed countries is expensive and hard to scale. So if you're able to find a way, we actually did see one case study, which was a WhatsApp-based AI chatbot in Sierra Leone that was able to provide on-demand pedagogical support to human coaches, that human coaches couldn't reach those teachers, that was able to support teachers in increasing their professional judgment and their capacity. We also see examples of doing simulations. We know the best way to practice and to develop professionally is not just a textbook, but actually practicing and doing that work. And AI has shown the capability to do that. And then finally is making expert teaching visible to novice teachers and showing and breaking down what are those best practices, right? Seeing is believing sometimes. There's a heart problem of I don't think these students can actually learn, but when you see a master teacher doing it, a novice teacher is able to pick that up. What we are actually seeing AI do though is a more in terms of substituting existing things, efficiency versus effectiveness. We're seeing a lot of lesson plans being generated. A lot of the studies are showing inputs. They're evaluating inputs, but not the actual output. How is this supporting students? Is it improving student outcomes? Is it developing the capacity of teachers to be able to judge those lesson plans, right? And we are seeing this big gap between the pace of the technology being implemented and the teacher's readiness to use it well, right? It's how any technology can be used for good or for bad. It can be harmful or helpful, but it all depends on our ability to use it. And that is a structural, cultural question. And so finally, in the 30 seconds I have, I would say the three key takeaways that we saw is number one, AI literacy. We use that as a term generally, but that is not an afterthought. It is a precondition to making sure that these technologies actually do help transform and not just reform or actually create more harm. And that means teaching about AI, teaching with AI, and teaching critically also against AI when it should not be used and how it should not be used. The second, though, is that the AI tools themselves, we need to be very careful. When teachers have pedagogical knowledge, that's great if they can exercise that judgment. But the AI tools, the education specific ones, making sure that they also have pedagogical content knowledge to be able to use effectively. And finally, this principle that AI must augment and not automate the job of teachers and their professional judgment. In fact, I think AI has created the need for more expertise and more professional judgment, not a replacement. It has increased its value. And so we need to also think about these ethical questions of this balance of surveillance versus support. Are we using AI to surveil teachers and support them? That's a cultural question, right? Not a technical question. And so I will end with that, but would love to hear your thoughts. And thank you for letting me share that overview, Fernando.
Thank you so much, Zainab. That was excellent. Let's talk a little bit about students learning and curriculum and what AI can help us do to have a more relevant and effective curriculum. Let me turn it over to you, Maria Rene.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to start by saying that I'm currently in a global south country with a very unstable internet connection. So in case I get ejected from this call, I'm sorry. it's still a global South problem. So as Stefania already said, we have a global learning crisis. Many students complete several years of school without basic literacy, basic numeracy, and AI literacy opportunities are still very limited, are uneven. So how could AI address these student level shortcomings? We have many examples of personalization at scale with those adaptive platforms that tailor pace, level, and support. AI can also help with expanded curriculum access, translating to foreign languages, helping with coding, critical thinking, even when the local teacher expertise is limited. AI can also help support diverse learners with translation, speech to text, also with all the accessibility tools that have been created. And we have this new um, type of AI unplugged models. It's teacher-facing tools that work with photos of notebooks with offline hubs. So we don't need a reliable internet connection to make them work. But we have many risks around access, gaps, privacy, bias, and over reliance on AI. The other topic I'm going to speak about is curriculum under strain. Common features of K 12 curricula in the Global South is that it's overcrowded and overambitious. There's an emphasis on rote content coverage and not on deep understanding. And what are the consequences? The instruction is pitched far above many students' level. Foundational skills and transferable 21st century skills are both underdeveloped. And the consequence is that we have a misalignment of curriculum, pedagogy, and assessments. And high stake exams are the ones that are driving the practice of teachers. So, AI literacy in the curriculum, teaching about AI. AI literacy must be seen as multidimensional. First, we need to explain how AI works and how it is developed. The secondly is using AI as a co-intelligence. And the third is understanding the impacts and the ethical dilemmas of AI. There are different ways of this AI literacy in the curriculum that are being implemented. There are national approaches, there are comprehensive mandates that were created in China, in the UAE, and there are more flexible frameworks and pilots in Uruguay, India, Estonia. But a good practice to keep in mind is to integrate AI across subjects, not as an isolated add-on, not having an AI subject, but having AI in math, in language, in history, also including the ethics, the bias, and the social implications of AI in every subject. And of course, backed by serious teacher professional development. Now I'm going to teaching with AI, the curriculum design and the delivery. AI must be seen as a curriculum design partner. It helps stream overload, it helps align content, generate local examples and translations. We already know of many cases of tools like AI-assisted lesson planning and textbook drafting. Also, we can see AI as a personalization engine. There are many adaptive platforms that can tailor tasks and also help teachers give feedback. What examples are we seeing? Adaptive maths and language platforms, and also AI tools for local language storybooks. Those are very interesting ones. There are many kids that didn't have local storybooks in their own language, and AI can help to do that. And of course, also offline digital classrooms. But what is the evidence showing us so far? There's promise, but we are still in the early days. There are many pilots, but few are large scales and not long-term evaluations. There are programs that have been evaluated for 3 months, 6 months, but as we know, the impacts in education, we see them also in long term. But we have positive findings, mostly context specific. Adaptive and tutoring systems can raise math and language scores. AI tools can save teacher time and improve feedback quality. And we have some evidence of large gains in short programs. There's an AI tutoring in Nigeria that was done that have very positive impacts. We have to be cautious with the bias towards better resource context. Also, there's limited evidence from these low resource and large scale deployments, and also being cautious on the impacts on higher order skills like autonomy and also equity that's still very under researched. Also, because I mentioned a lot the equity, the ethics, there's a risk that AI widens inequalities because of this unequal access to devices, to connectivity, unequal access to prepared teachers. Also, the ethical concerns are data privacy, as I already mentioned, algorithmic bias, reproducing these social inequalities, and the opaque decision making. Who's behind AI? There's commercial interests that shape curricula, and that's an ethical concern that we have to keep in mind. So, how to go from innovation to transformation? For policymakers and system leaders, we need to treat AI as a means, not as an end. AI needs to be anchored in three goals: building AI literacy, improve effectiveness in foundational learning, and enhance the relevance of 21st century and human skills. We need to invest in infrastructure, in teacher capacity, and in the system coherence that we talk so much in the book. And for developers and researchers, co-create with educators. We need to design for low resource, local context. We need to move beyond efficiency to support deep and transferable learning. And finally, we need to study the conditions under which AI improves outcomes for the most disadvantaged. And thank you for letting me explain this curriculum part without my internet going off. Thank you.
That was excellent, Maria Rene. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's move to the third section. And I'm going to invite Calista to talk to us about the possibilities and the realities of the use of AI to reimagine the organization of school, the leadership of schools and systems, and governance itself. Over to you, Calista.
Thank you, Fernando and Stefania. It's so great to hear from you and to be here in discussion together. I really appreciated from your opening your point about building system capacity, and I think that's what we were really looking at with this book, right? When we take a systems perspective to the use of AI in education, we realize that fields like school leadership and organization, as well as governance, are often overlooked. We kind of we focus only on the classroom segment, but we don't quite think about how to build system capacity. And so, in these two chapters, we were trying to really push on that and explore what can be done at the school leadership level, schools as their own subsystems, and then what can be done at the national education system level, where you have a whole network of schools, you have districts reporting to ministries. There's a lot of potential for AI use there. And so at the school leadership level, we were seeing a lot of interesting use cases in administrative automation where, AI is there to automate repetitive tasks, reduce the leader's administrative workload so that they can actually perform their duty as an instructional leader in their schools and really help to improve teaching quality rather than focus on doing a lot of the bureaucratic work, which we're seeing in global South countries. We're also seeing some uses of AI for data-driven decision support, and so helping visualize and make sense of data that's happening in the school, for example, attendance data or student performance data. This is being used to spot risks early and also guide interventions at the school level. And we're also seeing some interesting use cases where data is used collaboratively in their professional development cycles so that there's both the AI piece, but also the human interpretation and discussion of what we can do at the school level to improve the education systems there. And a few other things is improving the resource distribution and like optimizing that so that school leaders are aware of what kind of human or material resources are necessary for their schools. Using it to help leaders better inform their pedagogical practices, their leadership practices. So some interesting points there, but I would say a big theme that emerged was that focus on just efficiency and not transformation, where AI has such a great potential to improve communication, to improve decentralized leadership, to build capacity within the schools. We're still seeing a concentration within just the school principal, not quite thinking about participatory feedback, and more two-way kind of communication within a school community. So those are some interesting learnings that we thought about, and we're surprised by the lack of evidence or focus there. because, again, there's such great potential to support school leaders at the school leadership level, but the deployments, I mean, for good reason, have largely focused on the classroom and the teachers. When we move then on to the bigger system of education governance, again, policymakers now need AI as part of their toolkit, and AI tools are there to deliver on that. Interestingly, in education, the use cases are not as clear yet, and so we're borrowing a lot from other sectors like health or from budgeting in the United States. They have very interesting practices there that can be translated into global South countries, and so mostly we're again seeing more efficiency, but not quite transformation. Resource allocation is used for financial and human and budgeting processes, for example, at a larger scale. We're also seeing some strategic forecasting. And so what's going to happen to the labor force in the next few years? What are the skills demands? AI can help make sense and structure that data much faster than we could have done previously. I think another interesting use case that's being seen in a few global South countries like Mexico, Argentina, is the at-risk students. They can be predicted and known at the level of a ministry or a department of education. And so that predictive capacity of AI is very useful for, making sure that dropouts don't happen, making sure that students at risk receive the right support. We're also seeing some use cases, obviously, for monitoring and evaluation. And here, what's interesting is the capacity of AI to really analyze citizen engagement and sentiments, which I think is an overlooked part, but I'm sure as a policymaker, you're aware of how important that is and how that becomes part of the policy discussion. So if AI is able to help us streamline understanding what public sentiment looks like, also streamline feedback, that's a really great input for policymakers to really understand what's relevant to the classroom experience. And lastly, there were some uses of AI in service requests and helping to classify and route how ministries of education respond to teachers, to district leaders, to parents who are concerned. So again, there's been some interesting use cases, but the fundamental transformation of education is not quite, I think, the priority. We're still using these tools in governance and in school leadership to make things a little bit faster in the current way we do things, but I don't think we've quite explored what is really possible beyond that. I think another point that you raised was, there might be some difference in readiness. There's some countries that have a really strong AI capacity, ownership, and leadership. And oftentimes maybe some countries that are not quite ready. And I think one key takeaway from our observation is the message here is not that everyone needs to suddenly implement this AI system, but really to start with a readiness assessment of where you are. It doesn't make sense to use these tools to, use algorithms and suddenly distribute resources that way when you don't have the right accurate data. It's not timely. It's not up to date. You don't want to have such very heavily weighted decisions with strong outcomes. That are driven by AI tools without the fundamental systems to support that, like what Nene mentioned of internet connection, of really real-time data systems and all of that. So I think we're seeing this as a more staggered approach. Not to say that transformation is always the immediate thing to do, but to build and work towards that, which we're starting to see in some global South countries, but need much more evidence about. So that's a little bit for me about the systems level and thinking about the leadership of schools as well as the whole education system within a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalista. That was splendid. Stefania, so there is a lot that you have just heard, and I'd love to invite you to react to some of it, especially what do you think this all means for policy and practice in the coming years?
Thank you so much. Thank you. These three brilliant, really presentations and such provocative talks that I'm struggling to select the conscious of time, of course. The most critical points I heard, but everything you said, dear colleagues, is really crucial and is kind of putting the finger where a problem or a solution actually stays. So I would elaborate, with your permission, Fernando, around the three key words that I'm, taking from each presentation, right? That, in my opinion, synthesize better than others the message from Zaina. It's a question when we talk about teachers as the real decision makers. Whatever the process of learning and teaching is about their agency to promote, not to protect, to promote their agency through AI. And you provide us with such clear examples. The question that we also are very much aware at UNESCO, given our survey and the global report I mentioned before, that the teachers all over the world, they complain a lot, rightly, about this, heavy administrative workload they have, and they cannot focus no longer as it was in the recent past on their own job, which is about knowledge transmission, which is about accompany learners in their own learning pathway, given them, all and each of them, their own way to access learning and knowledge in the most appropriate way, considering their background, consider their skills, their talent, their personalities. And AI is a good ally on this point. AI can really be the assistant of teachers and not the new teacher in the classroom. So that's the way to frame the discussion. And I really appreciated a lot the statement which Zeina started from. AI is not a technical solution, especially when you talk about the role of teachers and how we must use it to empower teachers, to make their agency the real game changer for transformation, and not simply recipients of the last innovation the market and or the ministry can provide them with. So this is really crucial. You also highlighted another point, which is about, the misalignment between the speed of change in research, in market production of AI tools, whatever the domain of application, and public systems. And this is where the problem is still very much. We have to try to accelerate and to make, let's say, public systems, including education systems, crucially ready to change. Fernando, you remember in your and your colleagues' excellent Futures of Education report, and one of the points you highlighted is that the new social contract for education has to reframe also the conversation about the role of schools, education systems as part of the change of society at large, and not as, let's say, a recipient, a beneficiary of some innovation. And this is quite important to highlight now. So agency, in my opinion, and teachers' agency is the main message I take from Zeina's presentation. And then moving to students, the other important and main actors of learning processes. And I see here a key word, obviously, very much important, that Maria Renee, explained very well, the role of competencies and skills for learners, which is not simply about technical skills or digital literacy. Of course, our generation is kind of struggling in updating our and reskilling, upskilling our competencies. It's not the case for young generation, but it's very much taking the opportunity that AI can provide, and we have already very good examples and some evidence on specific domains. You mentioned foreign languages. I do agree as a linguist. By the way, I'm going to deal with this kind of issues in the future, in the near future, because I do think genuinely that when it comes to learning second language acquisition, AI can make the difference. Of course, with all the preconditions that you three of you highlighted. You mentioned also very much the importance of, and this is, was one of my first point, to have integrated this transformation within the curriculum, and the pedagogical content must be part of this transformation and not be addressed as a technical, nice to have. And of course, when it comes to students, not surprisingly, Maria was rightly highlighting also risks and let's say the dark side of the coin, so to say. UNESCO is the organization that is the first and the most advanced in this conversation to advocate for a human-centered, ethically driven approach to technologies, including, of course, AI. And I think that your examples are clearly, confirming that this is the approach to take. And then the last point I wish to highlight from your presentation, which is still the big question. I don't have an answer, honestly, but I can contribute to brainstorming today and possibly for the future together. How we can move, we can go from innovation to transformation, because we are still, we must be very honest. AI for specialists of I was yesterday here at the American University in Paris, and a nice conversation with colleagues, some of them engineers working in, let's say, data science since decades. And one of them told us very clearly, colleagues, AI is our tool somehow since at least the late 90s. So it's not something new coming out from the blue. The question is that now the application of especially generative AI, but broadly speaking, most interestingly, of this new generation of technology that we see so well developed for health, for education, are reaching out to the last users they must benefit from: teachers, medical doctors, nurses, principals in schools, and of course learners. So that's why the move from innovation to transformation has to be the outcome of a broader process. And this brings me to the last presentation, where I would synthesize with one keyword: leadership. Without a strong leadership from, you are focusing on schools, Calista, but we can say the same from the dean of a faculty, the rector of university, the principal in a school, to ministers of education or health. It's quite important that this innovation becomes structurally, as I said at the very beginning of our conversation, a solution, part of the solution. And that's where we can see the shift of paradigm from innovative, nice things to a real transformation of how we approach personalized learning pathways, how we approach automation of so many heavy administrative work streams that actually take time, energies, and intellectual leadership from other important tasks that are more very much at the core of the job description of a teacher, of a leader, of a dean in a school, or a principal. And then let me give you an example that brings me back, if I may, to Zaina's presentation. You mentioned Sierra Leone. I'm not surprised that you found something interesting there. You know why? As Sierra Leone is one of the small, interesting countries that they are really very much trying to improve and transform their education system. They had a brilliant education minister, maybe Fernando, you remember David Senge, who, by the way, comes from digital experiences in his previous steps in career in the private sector, academia, and some in the US, and is now chief coordinator minister, prime minister, so to say, of the country. And discussing with him, because we co-chair the steering committee, high-level steering committee, Sherpa group of the SDG 4. So we are still in touch. And I met him last year in Sevilla on the margin of the Financing for Development conference. And he told me, listen, I'm trying to embed into a national policy digital transformation, including AI. And we see ministers, taking very seriously this important part of their duties and opportunities to contribute to improve the quality of the work we are doing. And we are talking of Sierra Leone, it's a country that has a violent past to deal with, and it's a country which is still very much in terms of human development index, in the lowest position. But we see improvement, and we see improvement in education, through education. So this brings me really to the last point. Thank you so much, by the way. It's really inspiring, all of this. A lot of notes to work about. Maybe an idea I can share with you, colleagues, for the future, where UNESCO, whoever is going to take the amazing position I'm currently have, I'm sure will be a good ally. Could be very interesting to explore how we can put in place a RAM for AI in education, which means a readiness assessment methodology that can support leadership at country level to understand where they are. We did something like this, Fernando, recently, not me and my team, but my colleagues here in Paris, for AI, as a national policy without any reference to specific sectors, right? But could be very interesting based on the ethics of AI recommendation to elaborate. And, academia, Harvard in particular, can help us a lot, I think, for have a RAM for education. And this could help very much to fill the gap, which was the last point from Calista, difference in readiness, because of course there is still a huge divide from countries that are ready to go, they follow the speed of change, and other countries that don't have actually the right tools to assess and to take actions accordingly. So maybe this is the last, sent to this conversation about these three dimensions. But thank you so much. Thank you.
What a wonderful idea, this readiness assessment. We have only 7 minutes to go and a few questions that have been posted in the chat. I'm going to read them all and then invite you, Stefania, to talk about them. And then I'll invite my co-authors to share some concluding thoughts. So one of the questions is, what are the kinds of ethical issues that are currently under discussed in global conversations about AI and education? That's one question. The other one is, what kind of evidence is needed to understand the role of AI in improving school level capacity and collaboration? The third question relates to the last point you made, Stefania, when you were talking about our common friend David Senge. What the role of the private sector in education in the global south is yet to be defined. And so how can educators influence the private sector, especially in the global south, to build infrastructure to support education systems, especially in low resource communities? And the fourth and the last question is on the topic of school system leadership and governance. How can school systems that were not built for cross-departmental collaboration and agile organizational learning build systems and adapt to the pace of change in emerging technologies? What kind of best practices could we learn from? I realize there's a lot there, Stefania, so please address any of these that you would like to.
Yeah, thank you so much. They are all of them a very important question. So I will go very much, straight to the points I think should be made to at least address partly some of them. And then colleagues, I'm sure, have a lot to say. Ethical issues under discuss. I mean, we are the right counterpart to address this point. It's an issue of stereotypes and bias that unfortunately are still very much behind the way AI algorithms, let's say, more that algorithms have been developed so far. It's a question of languages behind. This is not only specific, ethical issue for AI, but it's the question of the risk that diversity is going to be undermined and sidelined against a dominating model, which is northern Indo-European languages, modern Indo-European languages driven from English to Spanish to French. I mean, those languages where there are more investment and companies working on. And finally, is more, let's say, hidden ethical point, the risk still that we overestimate I said at the very beginning, the role of technology, including AI. So we cannot see, in my opinion, AI as the silver bullet, right? That can resolve. No, should be part of the solution. And once again, agency, it's the human decision maker that have to make the choice. Now, evidence needed in terms of improving the quality of learning, right? Broadly speaking, I think we have fields where we can see, we can measure, we can assess, and we can have complete evidence of the impact of AI. Language acquisition for sure, STEM for sure. I'm more skeptical so far about evidences of the broader positive impact. You talk about, if I put right notes, collaboration in schools. I mean, the team building, the holistic approach that UNESCO promotes, by the way. To that end, I think it's a bit too early to have this evidence. We'll have something more clear when we'll move from innovation to transformation. We are still in the early childhood. We must be very honest. We must put in this dimension. But I'm confident that we can get there. The role of the private sector, listen, not only in the Global South, I was since the very beginning. Since COVID happened, we established the Global Education Coalition. Now, next week, we'll have 6 years later, more than 200 partners coming to UNESCO from the private sector. It's high tech, it's ed tech, but broadly speaking, those companies and the foundations which, because it's both, private sector, strictly speaking, and the foundations, philanthropy, that do think that education is also their business, do think that it's a collective shared responsibility. And honestly, we have, as international organizations, as specialists for education, to facilitate the role of the private sector as an ally, not as an enemy, let's say. Because without a shared responsibility, I don't see any real opportunity to make technology and AI for the best and not for the worse. And this includes the Global South. That's why I like Sierra Leone as a model, not the only one, I hope. Finally, school systems which are not ready, I already put my little cent to help countries to measure, because without knowing where we are, we cannot move elsewhere. That's a very simple principle for whatever the subject. So we have accompany all those school systems. They are not agile yet. They are not ready to change, with first a better knowledge of the state of the art and move ahead. We have the tools to do that, including normative instruments. I stop here, Fernando. Over to.
Thank you, Stefania. I'd love to invite Zainab, Maria Rene, and Calista to share some final thoughts on some of these questions. If you could keep it to a couple of minutes each, that would be great.
Kelly, you want to go first? We'll go backwards.
Sure. I think one that I wanted to address was from Daniel. Here I see one about school system leadership and governance. I think this is an interesting question because the best practices I think depend, right, like on the context, and I think this simplification of everything works everywhere is not quite helpful. So I would say like school leaders, going back to Stefania's point about leadership as well, school leaders have a very important role to play to see what's needed in their school and to understand their environment well, and therefore start working towards building these new systems or ways of working at the school level, but also nationally. To drive this transformation into a more collaborative, more agile kind of way of working that uses data, that uses AI. I think it goes back to a leadership question, which I think has been my personal takeaway from the discussion, that a lot of this relies on like really strong leadership that's keeping up to date with what's happening out there and seeing what applies to their context. That would be all from me. Thank you so much for the chance to share.
I'll just wrap up by saying thank you to Stefania for those key words that I think that are the basis to start the conversation about AI, agency, leadership, skills. And I think I'll remember those whenever I'll be speaking about AI, and also this readiness assessment for countries, because we've had a lot of the question on LinkedIn, for example, of policymakers that say, where do we start? How do we know what is the first thing we need to do if we want to implement AI? And I think that would be a very useful tool for them to start. So thank you.
And just to connect to Nene's point and what Stefania has been sharing, I think with AI, we think of it as this very advanced uh, tool beyond the internet, beyond what we've seen. But sometimes we need to go back to the basics, the beginning of not just how do we use it, but what are we actually trying to use it for? And that requires that thinking of what is the purpose, what are we trying to do, what are we trying to measure, even the metrics that we use, like you said, Stefania, right? If we don't measure those things, then we don't know where we are, so we don't know where we're going to go. But those metrics also matter, right? This someone wrote in the chat, Alexandra, that they worked with Paulo Freire in Brazil on emancipatory education, right? So very different definitions of education wherever you go, and that AI can be used for any one of those, right? Whether you want to surveil or support, and whether you want to build capacity or replace people, it can be used for both. So we really want to start with that question first for leaders, be those teachers or principals or governments and ministers. What are you trying to do and why are you trying to do that? And then everything else will follow from there.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to thank all of those of you who attended this seminar and those of you who will view the recording of it. I want to thank my three colleagues and co-authors, Calista, Maria Rene, and Zainab, for their splendid presentations today. And I want to thank you, Stefania, for joining us today, for your insights. But I want to thank you also once again for your extraordinary leadership in UNESCO, in how you rose to the occasion at that dark chapter of COVID to make sure that the right of education would not be interrupted, and how you build multi-stakeholders coalition to get all of us during those difficult years to do what we could, how you led the organization at a very difficult time on issues like the future of the teaching profession, greening schools, advancing SDGs, AI and education, and so many others. But I do think that, and of course, personally, I want to thank you for the fact that you always made time for students, that students for you were the raison d'etre of education, a theme that you strongly advocated for in UNESCO, and that you actually lived by example. Whenever I invited you to speak with my students, you were always there. I think it is very fair to say that with respect to your legacy, and it will be a big legacy in UNESCO, perhaps the most important is best captured by something that the poet Maya Angelou once said. And she said, I have learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And for including us, for making us feel included, that we matter, we thank you, Stefania. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you
Bye.
all.
See you
Bye.
soon,
Bye.
by the way.
Bye.
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 Bye
Bye.
bye.